Hi, it's Judy from River City Sewing Machine Centre in Wynnum in Brisbane, and we're here again to give you another bit of a look at the new PFAFF creative icon. Now, many of you may have seen our first video, which introduced a little bit of the basics of how to go about threading and using the needle threader and that kind of thing. So what we're going to do today is have a look just at the sewing mode and touch a little bit on it. And as we work our way through these videos, hopefully we'll give you a bit of an overview of the whole machine and some of its features. So today, like we said, we're going to go to the sewing mode. So I'm just going to turn the camera around so you can see the screen a little bit better. So when you open or start your machine and you turn her on, what's going to happen is everything calibrates and it gets to this point where you have these menu items here on the screen. One is Start Sewing, Start Embroidering, Load from My Sewnet, or Open Help Center. Now we're going to be covering these in detail so that you understand exactly where you are at any one time. But today we know where we're going, so we're going to go to Start Sewing and we'll come into our sewing screen. I've just adjusted the camera slightly so that you can see the sewing mode screen a lot easier. As you can see, there's a few little things on the screen we were going to explain for you. First of all, this bar here tells you where you are. So you're in sewing mode. It shows you your stitch on the screen, as well as shows you the recommendations of what foot that you should use for this particular stitch, the recommended foot, and whether your IDT could be engaged for the stitch or not. So that's in your recommendations. The information about the stitch is contained here. So that gives you the stitch menu, sub-menu, and the stitch number, and your speed. So again, if I went and adjusted my speed, it would adjust here as a percentage. The other thing too is the next one down is your active features. So if there's any function or feature that's been activated, like free motion mode, for example, if I touched one of those, it would show up here that I'm using a particular foot. So it's nice that we get those little things that we've activated showing us on the screen so that we have no doubt about what function or feature we're using. Now the nice thing is with the icon, I can clear that screen of all that information once I've gone through it, and I can move it and get rid of it, just swipe it off to the left. Now there's what I call the tourist information here, the little information sign. If I wanted to see that again, I could just touch it and it would come and fly back out. So these flyout menus are really good because you can move them around as much as you like. The other thing you'll see along the sewing mode screen here, and I'm going to try and go up here a little bit further, is you'll see in the top right hand corner you've got your question mark as well as a menu icon. Now up here is where we can touch, and it will give us a stitch selection menu, and from here we can scroll across to all the different menus. Okay, so that gives us a lot of scope to go across. So we've got utility stitches, quilting stitches, needle art, and if I've touched quilting stitches, sorry, I'll go back, quilting stitches, then you can see here that this is menu 2, sub menu 1 is all your hand look ones. Down here you'll see that there's another menu of stippling stitches and another menu of crazy patch stitches. So we always know which one is active because we have a green line underneath the active menu. So all you have to do to find out exactly where you are is just look for the green line or a green highlighted symbol. And that's what makes it really, really easy to know where you are. If I wanted to scroll across this way, it would take me to the next menu. Then I could touch my sub-menus and have a look at them from there. So I don't necessarily have to go back up to this scrolling bar. I can move across through the main menus or the numbers, or I can scroll back, and then all I need to do is touch the sub menus for me to see all the stitches contained in it. Takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's fine. So if you want to go back, if you get lost, remember we touch the home key down here on the bottom of the screen and it will take us back to start sewing again. So that's a really good thing if you get lost. The other way to select a stitch is you've got a flyout menu here on the right hand side, and there you've got, it's almost like your anchor, which is the blue lines. Then you've got what looks like a zigzag and a straight stitch and a cloud. If I touch the zigzag and straight stitch, it goes green, so it's active. So that's what I mean about if you're looking to see where you are, any icon that's active is green. So in this particular case, I've got my load stitch menu comes out, and I've got the same way I can select a menu item, a main menu, or like as before, I can go through and scroll across and it will take me through my main menus, which are numbered 1 to 9. Okay, so then instead of having words on my sub menu, they're just numbers. I can pull this menu out so I have full control of whether I only want to see a couple of stitches or whether I want to see a lot. So that's really neat because, you know, sometimes you don't want to see all of the different stitches if you know where you're going. But the nice thing is you can just flick across, go to your sub menus and have a look from there. So that's nice and easy. So again, once you're finished, if you do load a stitch, all you need to do is hold it, and as you can see in the background, just touch it and see how it's active now. It's turned green, which means that it's now on my screen. So if I wanted to go back and just do a straight stitch again, I've gone back to utility 1.1, my green straight stitch is active and it's loaded on the screen for me. So that's how you know which stitch that you've actually selected, because it's active here. Okay, so let's just pick the regular straight stitch. I'm going to pop that menu down. The other one here is your cloud. So if you have a stitch that you've saved in the cloud, you'll have your folders and all things that have stayed in the cloud, and there's been a few little projects we've done in here. Okay, so basically anything that you've saved to cloud will stay there for you, ready to load into the machine. If you wanted to save a particular stitch, say for example you like your blanket stitch, for example, and I've got number 6 there, and I go down here. This is where we edit the width and the length. So say for example I wanted to go to 2 by length, 2 by width. I wanted to save that. I just touch my heart and I might type the name as applique. Okay, so it'll be saved in my cloud from then on. So again, when anything's active, all I need to do is to touch the icon that's green and it'll go back to being, it'll deactivate it. So now if I go into my cloud, and there's my applique stitch. So if it wasn't already loaded, I could load it on the screen. So that's how you save all your favorites, so you don't have to keep re-editing your stitches. So that's how simple it is. So down at the bottom here of the screen, we've got, as we saw, stitch edit. So width and length. If you wanted to adjust your mirror image. So if you wanted the spikes to go to the right instead of the left, you mirror image, and it's active, so it's green. You can mirror image vertically, sorry, top to bottom, and it would be green. Sorry, my fingers are a little bit dry. So the nice thing about what a big change has happened with these stitches is that you can, your edit functions and items that you want to adjust, you can touch this little blue icon here next to Stitch Edit, and you'll see that you've got some blue highlights now on the screen. I can drag my Stitch Edit, both my length and my width adjustments, onto the screen, and that's going to be permanent. So whilst I'm going to touch out of Stitch Edit to go back to sewing mode. So now if I wanted to adjust, I could adjust without having to go through the Stitch Edit menu, and my screen is still really clean. So that's a nice thing. If you decided you wanted to take that away, you could close them and just start stitching. The other items in Stitch Edit is any stitch other than a straight stitch, you'll see this symbol, which is the symbol for your active stitch technology. Now, your active stitch technology, for those of you who are not aware what that is like a thread delivery or thread metering system. So it works, some people think of it as tension, but it actually delivers the right amount of thread for that particular stitch using the thickness of fabrics that you're putting through your machine. And we can still have a fine adjustment here going up or down, and they go in increments of 5. We can still have a little bit of adjustment should we think it needs it. Sometimes you might have a difficult thread that's not behaving itself, so you might want to adjust this slightly. I would give it a good run at the default setting and then just to try to adjust up or down to see if the result is much better for you. But you don't really need to change that too often. So the other element here is Stitch Creator. Now, Stitch Creator has its own menu down here at the bottom of the screen, but in Stitch Edit you can go and touch this icon straight away and it'll take you into Stitch Edit. Now, you might find that there's a lot of things that you'd like to drop. Say, for example, you wanted this particular stitch to be 1.5 by 1.5, as a lot of beautiful appliques can be. So what you would do is select your stitch editor, and if you wanted to change them at all, you could go through and change them. Now see what happens with Stitch Editor now. It's changed slightly. So the idea is here that you can change these stitches. We've got, this is our stitch, it's just repeated down here. So if I wanted to take these stitches, I could move them, and you can see what happens to them on the screen. If I ungroup them all, I could change the position of that stitch and see what happens. I can now see a film strip of exactly how that stitch is going to look. So you can have a bit of fun with Stitch Creator. And as you can see, now I'm making my own particular stitch. So that's going to be handy for some of you who just need an effect for a couple of stitches. Sorry, but we're going to cover Stitch Creator in its own little video at some point. So we're going to cancel. We're going to go back to our original stitch. So that's a little bit about the Stitch Edit function. So all you need to do is to edit your stitches, to come in, adjust your settings here and touch out. Same with Stitch Repeat. Now, some of you like to use decorative stitches. I know that you use them for different things. So I'm going to go and select a decorative stitch. Let's see. Let's pick a needle art stitch. And these are really cute. So I'm going to select stitch number 19. Okay, so now I've got my little cross stitch up here. It's really lovely. Beautiful as a black work or red work design. What I'd like to do though is I think I only want to do a very small design. So I'm going to go to my stitch repeat function. First of all, I'm going to go to single stitch program, and what that does is breaks the stitch down into one single repeat. So you can choose by using the menu down here how many of those you would like, and it will only stitch, in this case, 4, or I could have 5 or 6. Okay, so what will happen is the machine will stop after it gets to the number that you've asked for. If I disengage the single stitch program, as you can see, it goes back to a regular repeatable stitch. Many of you do lots of patchwork where you have multiple blocks, single block quilts, and quilts that have the same amount of sewing each time. And this is what the patchwork program is, and we're going to cover a whole section on patchwork and quilting features on the machine. So for now, if you want to stitch repeat, basically you tell the machine exactly how many that you'd like to stitch by sewing, and then when you're done you touch your reverse button, as what you can see here, so it reminds you, and it will keep doing that exact amount of stitches each time. So great for people who do lots and lots of repetitive sewing. This might be a bit of a saviour for you with the patchwork program, but like we said, we'll get into that in a patchwork and quilting video on this. Free motion, well, in the stitch, so stitch repeat, we're going out. Free motion, obviously we need to have a straight stitch because it's not much point having a free motion stitch on this one. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our main menu and select utility 1.1, and if we, now that we've touched free motion, we've got a few options. As you can see, there's 3 options for us to use different feet with this machine. Now as you can see, there's a dynamic spring foot and 6D free motion foot. So this foot touches and senses as the thicknesses and the layers of what you're doing, and it touches down as the needle penetrates the fabric. The second option is a traditional spring motion foot that you can get as an option. So it does the same action, but it's more like a spring. The third option we've got is a sensomatic free motion foot, so like a 6A. So what generally happens with that is it's a clear foot, it touches down on your fabrics and senses that, and then it tends to hover over the top so that you don't have any drag at all on your fabric. So you can choose any one of those 3, and once you do, you can hear the machine actually drop the feed dogs. So it's a one-touch free motion. All you need to do is then tell the machine which foot that you're using so that it's going to give you the right action and sew in the right manner for that particular foot. So that's a little bit about that. So we're going to close. Tie-offs, this is a feature that's been standard for PFAFF for a long time, but now instead of having just little symbols, they've actually given us full wordings here. So tie off at the beginning, tie off at the end, and thread cut. So as you can see, as I'm selecting these things, they're coming up in the active features menu, so that I know when I get to the end and I press reverse, I can then, it'll tie off at the beginning, tie off at the end, and it'll cut my thread. So that's really nice. So you can turn them on and off as you'd like. Because not everybody likes to tie off, especially if you're patchworking, but some people do like that. So it's totally how you want to use your machine. The other item we've got down here is called Sequence Creator. Now that is as what its name says. You're creating a sequence of different stitches to repeat. So like your running stitch is a single stitch repeated. This one we're going to create a sequence of different stitches, and it can be really fun for things like crazy patch. If you love some stitches but you don't want to have great big lines of different stitches all in a row, you can sequence a few together and get some really interesting results. So let's just have a look at it. So how we go in is we touch Sequence Creator. Okay, so we've got a few options here now on the screen. So what we see up here is your information. We've also got a little window that tells us which, or not so much which, but a film strip style of how many stitches we have. We can go back and select the stitches even after we put them in the sequence. We can delete them, we can edit them, we can do all those kinds of things. Okay, I'm going to show you how this works. So first thing we've got to do is actually select a stitch. Now we can select from up here in our menu, or we can select from here. So I'm going to go down and select a stitch. Let's select something a little bit better than that you can see. Okay, so I selected a satin stitch start, so that now says I've got 2 stitches. One is, you can see it's highlighted up here in green. I'm going to get rid of that. That was the start of my satin stitch. The second stitch is our satin sequence here. So let's go and find another scallop, and let's find something that you can actually see what I'm selecting. Okay, so I've selected a few stitches there. Now this looks pretty crazy, but it's good to show you exactly why this is so much fun. So we've selected a sequence of 7 stitches. Okay, so at the very beginning, we've got stitch number 1, which is a 1 little satin stitch. Stitch number 2 is that scallop. Stitch number 3 is that one that looks like the harbour bridge. Third one is a little satin. This one here is a cross stitch. This one here is another scallop. And this one here is like a quilting clamshell. So if I like that and I pressed OK, you can see that this keeps repeating. So that would be our sequence of stitches. Isn't that really cool? So the nice thing is in Sequence Creator, if I deleted all these, it comes up as it gives me a clean screen. I could sequence lettering. So say for example you wanted to put, maybe for me I'll put in River City. Okay, now I'm happy with that. If I press OK, then I would have a continuous line of River City, River City, River City, which is great if you want to make your own labels, you want to sew some text or some fonts onto your sewing, make your own labels, that kind of thing. So that's interesting. However, it's really cool if you go into Sequence Creator and you can add things like a nice stitch. So we've got some really cute decorative stitches in here. So say I wanted a leaf, and then I wanted a maple leaf for our friends in Canada. Then we could add some letterings, and we can go so I'm putting in falling leaves, space. I can go back to my stitches. I can put in another couple of leaves until I'm happy, and then get rid of the alphabet, and then I could go OK. Now if there was something like, I've put that flower in there, and that flower is pretty ordinary, I didn't really want that in there, so I could go back using my little up and down arrows here, and that's now that is highlighted, that little flower, and I can go into stitch settings And I can use, now it's highlighted, I can use my rubbish bin and I can delete it. So once I'm happy now with my sequence, I could go OK. And again, my sequence would be falling leaves, falling leaves, falling leaves. But it would put in my picture stitches as well. So that's pretty neat. But you can do that quite a lot. And you can also use your tapering if you wanted to. So if I said that I wanted a 45-degree angle top and bottom, look what's happening to my taper here. And I go to full screen mode, and you can see what's happening to my taper here. So it's giving me 45 and a 45 at both ends, because it was originally selected under multi. If I said I wanted just a 60-degree at the beginning and a 120-degree at the end, I could be a little bit more creative with that. So that's all about tapering. So once you're happy, then you would stitch it out, of course. The other thing is the balance. So we can balance length and width. So we can make sure that our preview matches. So when we've sewn our stitches out, we basically go and do the balance on our stitches, but we'll cover that in another video, because that one we have to sew it all out so we get the balance right. And that's especially when you're using a lot of decorative stitches where it's quite open and has to come back on itself. We can adjust the balance so that that stitch is those stitches stitch out perfectly. So that's a little bit about your sewing mode. There's lots of fun things in there that you can do. The main thing is get in there and have a bit of a sew, and it's one of those things that we love to experiment with, some of these decorative stitches. Now don't forget about your full screen mode. Full screen takes everything off the screen so that you can see exactly what's going on, and you can touch it again to come back and get your stitch editor functions and things like that. Okay, so if you're wondering why we've got this little symbol here, if you have a look in your active features here, it's talking about our tapering. So if we did want to remove our taper, goes off. So now there's no little arrow symbol, because we can see here that was active. So if you get some really strange things on your screen, at least you know what functions are active. So hopefully that's explained a little bit about the sewing functions on your machine. Be careful when you have a look up here, make sure that you're putting the right foot on, and make sure that if it's got a recommendation for, this is a stabilizer recommendation, so make sure that you've got something underneath to hold those stitches. So the main thing is go and have fun. So that was a little bit of an introduction to the sewing side of the PFAFF Creative Icon. I know that we've only just touched the surface, but there are many more features and functions that we'd like to bring to you. I know that there's lots of things like these radiant stitches, the floating stitches and the ribbon stitches, and we're going to be bringing you all of those. So stick with us, and we'll bring you more information as we can. So hope you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to bringing you the next installment of the new PFAFF Creative Icon. Thanks.